Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 7295, Projectile Buddies. VS appreciated the tour. While he had not been given permission to dig into the guts of the Sigma Drift, the close look increased his familiarity with the new machine. The Red Association had made a serious effort to advance its technologies and close the gap with the cybernetic empire. While the latter was undoubtedly ahead in terms of conventional technology, the Meshers had made a sincere attempt to leverage its head start in superdimensional technology to invent a couple of early applications. VS really wished he could take a closer look at the spatial dissociation engine and the Sydney particle cannons. He still did not understand how the SDE enabled the mech to momentarily drift across dimensions. He also did not understand how the strange particle cannons opened up energy tunnels to the higher dimensions. He had so numerous questions that he could not even begin to ask them. There was no point in voicing them out loud, though. While Jovi had clearly been briefed in advance, he was not in charge of the experimental design project nor participated in the development of the two experimental systems. When VS asked a number of probing questions, he quickly figured out that Jovi did not possess that much expertise in superdimensional technology. This made it difficult for VS to talk shop and develop new insights. Superdimensional technology may be reserved for the rich and powerful, but it opens so many new possibilities that he could not wait to explore them in person. Of course, VS still needed to keep his priorities straight. While he was more than willing to become proficient in this field, he still considered hypertechnology and e-technology as his roots. Is there any possibility to upgrade the Sigma Drift into a Carmine mech? He asked. We don't have to do it now. We can always wait for later. Jovi shook his head. This discussion has come up. There is no need to do so at the moment. A high-tolerance neural interface can partially replicate the benefits of a Carmine system. The added value of granting Major Jankowski access to a new control system will be lower than usual. Ultimately, we do not think it is beneficial for Major Jankowski to remain tied to a single mech for the rest of his life. We can revisit this discussion when he has reached his next bottleneck. Fine. The Meshers wanted to gather data on how mech pilots were able to develop when they turned into artificial champions. VS was sure that the RA planned to monitor the data of Carmine mech pilots that made use of the new pilot breakthrough elixirs. However, the Meshers already placed the Major Jankowski in the group that only made use of high-capacity neural interfaces. This was a sensible decision. The Sigma Drift already contained plenty of new and experimental technologies. Introducing a change as colossal as installing a Carmine system would severely complicate the analysis on the performance of the spatial dissociation engine and the Sydney particle cannons. Both mech designers moved on from this particular discussion. Are the SDE and the new particle cannons susceptible to space suppression? Yes, but not as much as you think. Jovi responded. It is not possible to suppress internal manifestations of superdimensional technology. You do not have to fear that an extremely powerful space suppression module can turn a superdimensional mech inside out all of a sudden. That would be extremely silly. What about external manifestations? VS asked. The answer is a little more complicated. Jovi vaguely answered. Do not ask me about the specifics. I do not understand the science myself. I can only tell you that heavy space suppression will make it harder for the SDE to make the mech drift across dimensions. It will also make it harder for the Sydney particle cannons to channel higher dimensional energies. Doesn't that make them vulnerable to catastrophic malfunctions? Our developers have already taken those scenarios into account. They have implemented additional safety features to account for suppression. Jovi did not sound too certain about that. Major Jankowski will just have to be more careful once he entered the field with his new machine. Where is Major Jankowski, by the way? Shouldn't he be down here to admire his new machine in person? He is undergoing surgery at the moment, the RA mech designer replied. In order to increase the success rate of the experiment, we are modernizing his augmentations and updating them to higher specifications. The differences will not be great, so he should make a quick recovery. I see. Will he recover in time to proficiently take control over his new mech? He is an expert candidate. He will adapt. Jovi confidently spoke. Expert candidates may be more than human, but not to a massive degree. VS seriously doubted that Major Jankowski would be able to unlock the full potential of the Sigma Drift so easily. However, the Meshers were willing to toss the expert candidate to the deep end. Perhaps the unfamiliarity along with all of the new pressures might produce a miraculous result. After the tour came to an end, Jovi no longer kept VS company. That's it. VS looked a little disappointed. There are more secrets for you to learn, but it is best not to overload you with unnecessary disclosures. His friend responded. There are many more secrets for you to learn so long as you return to Jernstall or another stronghold of the Red Association. If not, you can wait for me to schedule another briefing to bring you up to date on relevant affairs. The information that Jovi had shared today was already big enough to put VS to thought for a long time. More disclosures would only add to his bewilderment. Fine. I will wait for you to come again in the future. Jovi smiled and placed his hand on V's shoulder. Good. I need to report back and take care of other matters. Take care and be ready for action. Our intelligence suggests that the Goliath Hive is paying greater attention to this star system. What are you implying? We do not have enough proof, but there is a suspicion that the mutated Vorabugs are paying additional attention to notable human individuals, such as yourself. VS grimaced. That was not good news. It showed that the mutated Vorabugs did not see all humans as indistinguishable meat. The Hive Princesses or the Devourer Queen may be intelligent enough to understand that certain humans were much more important than others. If the Vorabugs were clever enough to understand human society, then they may be able to figure out the weight of a Tier 2 galactic citizen. If this was the case, VS subjected himself to additional risks by lingering so close to the front lines. The longer he stayed in one location, the more he opened himself up to a massive decapitation or capture operation. Even so, VS did not feel the need to retreat right away. With 30 ascended giants at his disposal, his fault tolerance was not as meager as before. That said, VS should not give in to complacency. He made sure to allocate enough hours to tinker with his own war gear. The RA supply fleet granted him access to new materials and tech that he gratefully made use of. His temporary raiment for his other self gradually took shape, though not as fast as he would like. Couldn't be helped. The superdimensional giant regalia was just too big at a ratio of 3x. Even with the new superdimensional production machines brought by the latest supply fleet, there was just too much superdimensional matter that needed to be processed. In order to speed up its development, VS invited a handful of trusted mech designers such as Alexis Trion and Xanther Larkinson to assist with the work. The former had already made an effort to study superdimensional technology, while the latter proved enthusiastic to learn. How are your studies going so far, Xanther? VS asked as they worked in his private workshop. There is too much for me to learn, the younger Larkinson complained. I really do not know how you have been able to improve so quickly. My studies take up too many hours. I not only have to strengthen my fundamentals, but also learn entire new disciplines such as superdimensional technology. Can I apply for EdNet training? No. VS directly rejected the request. It is not necessary for you to do so. Your learning speed shouldn't be too bad as long as you have kept up your auxiliary chi cultivation. His cousin clearly did not agree with that statement. I still feel as if I keep falling behind. Everything is progressing rapidly. That is especially now that the cybernetic empire has returned and showed off lots of new tech. Don't pay too much attention to that. VS patiently warned his former student. It is true that human technology is undergoing another period of rapid development, but much of it does not have any direct relations to our work. You should leave most of this stuff to the professionals who are equipped to deal with other subject matters. All you need to care about is the knowledge that is directly related to your specialization. Even then, you do not need to keep up with every single development. You just have to do your best to make your products competitive. Xanther reluctantly nodded. I understand. It is hard, but I am trying. To be honest, I like it here. Ever since we entered the Philaster Crestia system, I have been able to consult Lord Richard Brownstone for guidance and tips. Our specializations are similar enough. That was true. Xanther Larkinson chose to specialize in the development of energy-based explosive munitions. Richard Brownstone meanwhile specialized in high-attribute kinetic damage applications. Both of them loved projectile weapons. The biggest difference was that Xanther loved big explosions while the Rebarthan liaison preferred strong impact damage. Of course, Lord Richard was much further ahead in his own craft. There was very little he could learn from Xanther, but in the interest of promoting good relations, he had been generous in his advice. Would you like to stay by his side for a longer period of time, so that you can continue to learn from him? VS asked. Xanther shook his head. No. My time as a student has passed. I have already learned enough from you. No offense, but I do not want to remain useless. It is time for me to contribute back to the clan. I am working on developing different and more substantial applications than my Fade Burst rounds. Do you have any promising leads? Not yet. Give me a few more weeks at least. I will be ready to present my progress to you then. Is that all right? Sure, Xanther. VS thought about inducting him into the mech designer system at that point. If Xanther's work demonstrated enough initiative and maturity, then he should be ready to gain access to the powerful functions of the system. He was not the only candidate. VS had been trying to keep an eye on the EdNet returnees such as Sarah and Dula Voikin to figure out whether they were suitable to be inducted as well. VS found it much more difficult to decide to let them in because of how much time they spent apart from each other. The years-long separation had caused them to be alienated from each other. It remained to be seen whether they could rebuild the trust and tacit understanding that they previously maintained. It was especially difficult for the EdNet graduates to slot back into the design department as they experienced many more subjective years away from the clan. He still needed to observe the mutated Vorabugs a little longer, but he already came up with a few tentative ideas on how to help the Rebarthans fight off the insect swarms. More chapters in Buyer's Club for TMT. Chapter 7296. Aurelia's Last Innocence. Hi. Meow. I miss you so much, Lucky. Meow meow. Of course. I miss you as well, Clixie. VS and Gloriana smiled as the cats hugged the physical projection of Aurelia. After a short but rapid journey across the stars, their firstborn daughter safely arrived in the Yernstall Central Star node without incident. Although they already predicted that their little girl would not encounter any trouble while traveling aboard one of the fastest and most elusive vessels of the Red Fleet, they still felt relieved that none of their enemies went out of their way to target their lovely girl. Hi. You are so fluffy, Clixie. No cat is as huggable as you. It will be hard to replace you. I wish you were with me. Ah, you too, Lucky. As their girl continued to get mobbed by their pets, VS turned towards the second girl in the remote call. How is her security, Marigold? The Fleeters have been accommodating. The living artifact responded in a professional tone. They have not accepted all of our suggestions, but they acted within the limitations of their authority and discretion. Our ship slightly deviated from our planned route and introduced unexpected delays. We do not know if these minor deviations have foiled potential ambushes, as we have not encountered any suspicious activities in the sun systems that we have passed through. They talked a bit more. VS grew relaxed when he heard that no odd or suspicious incidents had taken place. His paranoia already told him that the likelihood of interception was not that great in the first place, but who knew whether his enemies sought to target his daughter just to obtain leverage over a newly ascended Tier 2 galactic citizen. If he had his way, the entire Blue Jay fleet would have left the Rebarthan front and escorted Aurelia all the way back to Yernstall. However, this was an extravagant gesture that completely contradicted its current mission. As much as VS loved his daughter, he could not justify this decision. This was why he ultimately gambled on the Flectors being able to deliver Aurelia to one of the centers of human civilization without any complications. After Aurelia had her fill with the cats, Gloriana approached and bent down in order to embrace her dark-haired child. My baby girl. Mama. Gloriana planted one kiss on her daughter's forehead after another. It had not been a long time since they physically separated from each other, but the mother already missed her oldest daughter dearly. A mother's love was one of the most precious commodities in all of reality. Of course, Gloriana had remained in contact with her girl practically every day since their separation. The concerned mother did not feel relieved unless she sent a message and had her girl respond to it promptly. They both knew that being able to correspond freely with each other would soon turn into a luxury. In order for the RF to mold bright young teenagers into disciplined and semi-professional naval cadets in the shortest amount of time, the naval academies heavily restricted their contact outside of their halls. Outside of designated break periods, it would be difficult for Aurelia to call back to her family, let alone leave the academy and visit other places. The naval academies were still in the process of reforming their educational programs. The Age of Dawn had rewritten the rules. Every school had to contend with brats that had become smarter and more capable learners after they engaged in simple auxiliary chi cultivation or obtained companion spirits. The ongoing wars also pressured the academies to compress their curriculums and graduate their cadets sooner. The higher the study intensity, the fewer opportunities for the children to contact their families in person or by remote. This meant that this would probably be the last time that VS and Gloriana would be able to speak freely to their daughter. After chatting with their daughter for 10 more minutes, VS and Gloriana finally satisfied their need to get in touch with their girl. VS eventually waved his hand. You can go talk to Andraste and Marvain. They have missed you dearly. Aurelia nodded and smiled. She had missed them as well. This was the first time in her life that she was completely separated from her immediate family. The only Larkin son keeping her company these days was her bonded artifact. But that was not the same. As Aurelia and Marigold went off to play with the other kids, Gloriana leaned against her husband. I wish we were still living in the age of Mechs. She sighed. It was so much more peaceful back then. The The native aliens presented no threat to the Big Two, while the cosmopolitan movement could do little to change the status quo. We would have been able to raise Aurelia in peace on a peaceful planet such as New Constantinople 8. VS was not so sure about that. I don't think so. You know how I am. Settling down in one location is not really my thing. We would have continued to travel deeper into the Red Ocean. In order for Aurelia to get the best possible schooling, we would have sent her to an academy sooner or later. Perhaps the only deviation is that we would have sent her to a school in Bridgehead 1 as opposed to Jernstall. Bridgehead 1's importance was much greater than Jernstall. Although the latter's location was more remote, its development was far greater. It also had much easier access to the old galaxy, making it easier to go on excursions to famous locations. As VS and Gloriana continued to chat, Aurelia eventually came back to them and said goodbye. This time, they both knew that it would take months to regain contact with each other. The naval academies made no secret of their intention to put the brand new cadets through an introductory training program of sorts. Take care, Aurelia. I will, Papa. I will miss you so much. I will think of you every day. After planting a final kiss on his daughter's forehead, VS watched on until her physical projection finally disappeared. Both VS and Gloriana felt melancholic as their daughter truly started to spread her wings from this point onwards. The transition from a child to a teenager was one of the most significant transitions of a young human's life. The genetic aptitude test was a turning point that had always influenced the trajectory of a young person's education and career. Both parents felt a little unaccustomed to the idea that Aurelia had finally grown old enough to reach this junction. After all, it was not too long ago that Aurelia remained carefree as she lived under their care. VS realized that by the time he next met with Aurelia in person, he would meet with a very different girl. All children have to grow up sooner or later, he whispered. In this dangerous dwarf galaxy, it is not necessarily bad for Aurelia to lose her youthful innocence a little sooner rather than later. His wife looked sad, but she did not disagree with his assessment. It is the fault of the Great Severing. If not for the native aliens, Red humanity wouldn't have been forced to face an existential threat. No two existential threats. VS reached out and held her hand. We'll get through this, Gloriana. The situation looks dire, but the cybernetic empire's well-prepared reinforcements are making a difference. She snorted. I am not seeing that. The Rubarthan front keeps reporting losses. The cybernetic empire's impressive war planets may be able to block the mutated Vorabugs, but they are traveling too slowly through space. Even if they arrive, the cybers may have sent too little of them to stabilize the faltering front lines. There are too many insects. It is impossible for any human weapon to eradicate them with any degree of efficiency. She was unfortunately correct, at least for the time being. VS did not lose hope, though. Trust in our civilization. We are one of the most inventive races of the Milky Way and the Red Ocean. Even if we can't rely on old-fashioned arms to defeat the native aliens, we can still rely on more unconventional solutions to do the job. There are more and more people who urge the use of nanomachines or bioweapons to scour our star systems of Vorabug life. Reckless. These idiots are completely disregarding the risks of employing these solutions. I will not speak about the stupidity of trying to defeat one organic plague with another biological plague. The use of nanomachines in unrestricted warfare has always been subjected to heavy restrictions for fear of unleashing a Grey Goo scenario. No machine is infallible. What if the cosmopolitans and other enemies have managed to hack or subvert the programming of those nanomachines? We may easily introduce a third major threat to our civilization in the Red Ocean. Although VS knew that her concerns were valid, the cybernetic empire had made a lot of attainments in the field of nanotechnology. He had even obtained the design schematics of a few smart metal products. Unfortunately, the other major players did not trust the cybernetic empire's ability to maintain control over its nanomachine swarms. This was why the CE had yet to deploy any forces that proactively made use of this controversial tech at the front lines. VS personally believed that this prohibition would not last forever. The Rubarthans were suffering too numerous losses to remain stubborn for long. He called up a projection that showed the latest headlines related to the Rubarthan front. Mach Testa 3 has fallen. Bugs have. The 29th Imperial Arden Fusiliers have heroically repelled a mutated Vorabug assault at the cost of suffering 70% casualties. Prices of mechs and related supplies has risen by 12% on a monthly basis. Is pride as important as safety? A plea to reach out and re-establish our alliance with the Red Association and the Red 3. The news articles were predominantly negative. Of course, VS did not visit a news portal that was controlled by the Rubarthan Pact. The new colonial alliance had been doing its best to spin the narrative in a more positive fashion, but their attempts were too obvious. There were only so many ways the journalists could obfuscate the consistent losses at the front lines. At least our daughter is no longer within the reach of the mutated Vorabugs, VS sardonically said. If the mutated Vorabugs manage to ambush our Blue Jay fleet and get rid of us all, we can still rest assured that our eldest daughter will remain safe. V.S. Gloriana angrily hissed and slapped his arm. Do not joke about such matters. It was not a joke. He continued to browse the news. V.S. felt rather fortunate that the major powers did not impose too many restrictions on this industry at this time. The galactic net continued to connect humans across the new frontier. Even if journalists attempted to distort the events taking place at the front lines, plenty of civilians could pass on the truth through their own channels. V.S. wondered how long this would last. The temptation of cracking down on independent reporting grew by the day. Once the galactic net no longer permitted people to transmit their own voices as freely as before, human civilization would suffer. Perhaps that was the reason why the major players did their best to preserve the galactic net as much as possible. Once the galactic net no longer allowed people across the dwarf galaxy to connect to one another as easily as before, population groups would begin to turn into silos. This had already happened to the residents of Bridgehead 1. It only took 2 generations of isolation for the citizens of the cybernetic empire to develop a completely new identity. V.S. could not imagine how much worse it would be if all of the other population groups drifted apart from each other. More chapters in Buyer's Club for TMT. Chapter 7297, Vorabug Siege Weapon. What the hell am I looking at? V.S. asked as he stood close to the center of a secure and darkened command center. That is the surprise that the Goliath Hive has in store for us. Lord Richard Brownstone grimly responded. It is a moon. An organic moon. The description sounded apt. In the final days before the Goliath Hive would likely commence its final assault on Philaster Crestia 3, an innumerable amount of bug swarms departed from their hidey holes in the outer system and converged in orbit of a planet that served as the bridgehead of the insect invasion. Nobody knew what the Vorabugs had in mind at first. They initially feared that the Vorabugs had chosen to launch an all-out assault at that point. Then they saw what actually happened. The cannon fodder bugs collided against each other. They mashed together until they turned into a meatball. And soon this meatball kept growing larger and larger over time. The meatball grew at an astonishing pace. It was initially the size of a subcapital ship, but only took less than a minute to reach the volume of a large RF battleship. Then it kept growing and growing in size. Although the expansion rate of its radius gradually slowed down, its volume continually expanded at a prodigious rate. The long-range recording went into fast-forward. Hours passed by. The amalgamation of bug flesh continued to grow and expand until a brownish-black sphere started to take shape. Its size began to rival the small moons orbiting the remote planet. Not just V.S., but all of the other Rebarthan staff officers gathered in the command center looked horrified or aghast. Those who witnessed the emergence of this organic monstrosity looked like a ghost had appeared. Those who had learned about the formation of this anomalous organic construct or seen recordings at an early date all looked grim. No matter what, the Goliath Hive's latest move had completely smashed apart their projections and their battle plans. The meticulously planned tiered defensive layout that they had been working on during the past week only accounted for the presence of massed Vorbug swarms and dozens of Goliaths up to level 7. It did not account for the formation of an organic moon that was steadily growing larger than all of the other moons in orbit. The atmosphere in the command center grew gloomier by the second. There has been a new development since we last observed the formation of this organic moon. The grandson of the Brownstone Prince announced. The recording continued to show the growth of the organic moon. The swarms of Vorabugs had petered out at this point. Many of them had already crashed into the colossal flesh construct and melted into its enormous embrace. This growth rate had slowed down. It had absorbed so many bugs that much of the available cannon fodder in this part of the outer system no longer existed anymore. The Philaster Crestia system had become a lot less populated all of a sudden. Had the massive organic alien construct reached its zenith? No. The moon had yet to sate its appetite. Since its food no longer came to it on their own accord, the biomoon decided to satisfy its hunger on its own initiative. What is it doing? The organic construct is spawning millions of mutated Vorabugs of an unknown subspecies. No matches have been found in our database. Small bugs emerged from holes spread across the surface of the entire globe. The freshly spawned Vorabugs did not appear to be strong. They did not linger at the orbiting biomoon, but immediately departed for the nearby planet. Soon enough, the lifeless world became infected by a growing number of Vorabugs. The creatures landed on the surface and began to burrow through the surface. The bugs disappeared from sight and eventually emerged above ground with fatter and heavier bodies. These bugs had clearly devoured the planet's resources. They flew back to the orbiting biomoon with a full haul in their large stomachs. The amount of Vorabugs that engaged in this activity was difficult to count. However, it was undeniable that all of this activity promoted the growth of the biomoon. While its volume did not appear to grow any further, It was most definitely becoming denser and more difficult to damage than before. The recording eventually came to a halt. This is what has happened in the past few days. As of this moment, the organic moon is still siphoning tough and heavy materials from the terrestrial planet. It has apparently become a pickier eater as it is no longer absorbing low-quality materials. Our analysis tells us that there are multiple reasons behind this. If the biomoon's mass is too high, it becomes too slow and unwieldy to traverse across space. That news only provided a small amount of consolation. The fact of the matter was that the defenders of Philaster Crestia 3 still had to contend against an alien monstrosity that could rival the size of most moons and small planets. Sure, there were greater phase whales and ancient phase whales whose true bodies could also grow to this extent, but every red human was already accustomed to this reality. They did not expect for the mutated Vorabugs to be able to field units of this scale, especially so early in their racial development. Everyone had long formed the impression that mutated Vorabugs almost entirely consisted of relatively small and weak ordnance fodder units. Even if the Goliath hive turned out to be an outlier and liked to develop Goliath strains, their sizes remained reasonable. Pretty much every human had dismissed the possibility that the Devourer Queen or the Goliath Princess would choose to allocate so much biomass to a single organism that the appearance of the biomoon completely broke their expectations. Lord Richard Brownstone studied everyone's expression. He took in their confidence and their willingness to confront this new alien horror. What he saw disappointed him. The Rebarthans had tempered themselves in the war against the native aliens, but that did not necessarily mean that their tolerance for new and unusual surprises had reached a satisfactory standard. This was one of the shortcomings of Rebarthans and other citizens of powerful first-rate states. For a long time, first-raters had lived comfortable lives. Almost everything fell into their control, and it was difficult for them to suffer life-threatening setbacks on the battlefield. Due to the peace enforced by the Big Two, many conflicts between major powers ultimately devolved into rule-bound competitions. It had been centuries since the human race truly waged unrestricted warfare against unambiguously hostile foes. Though the Red War allowed the Rebarthans to shake off their rust and rouse their violent hearts, their mentalities had yet to reach their height. The humans who lived during the peak of the Age of Conquest would definitely feel ashamed if they could meet their bedraggled descendants of the current age. The 7 apex races had been anything but easy to defeat at the time. Humanity constantly walked across a tightrope as it had to balance between unrelenting aggression and strategic withdrawal. The human race learned many bloody lessons during its ascension in the old galaxy. As a scion of the Rebarthan imperial household, Lord Richard had grown up hearing stories about the legendary figures that boldly confronted the seemingly unbeatable alien empires that held a solid grip on the Milky Way for eons. He not only learned about the most glorious feats, but also the abject failures that took place during all of those exciting times. This knowledge gave him a higher perspective of the Rebarthan Pact's precarious state in the current day and age. While the newly reformed colonial Star Empire was definitely in dire straits, Lord Richard still believed in the strength of the human spirit. His distant ancestors had confronted many bizarre and powerful alien obstacles during the Age of Conquest, but they always managed to overcome them one way or another. The Rebarthans must not falter in front of this latest variable. Doing so would only feed the confidence of the mutated Vorabugs and encourage them to flood the front lines with many more of their super bio-constructs. Soldiers, Lord Richard spoke in a firm tone. We, the defenders of the Philaster Crestia system, are privileged to become the first ones to encounter the latest superweapon deployed by the mutated Vorabugs. On the surface, it appears our latest enemies intend to deploy their version of a battle moon in the next decisive battle. The Vorabug Organic Battle Moon, or VOBM in short, will require the use of much more destructive weapons than we currently possess. We need to discuss the threat posed by this new alien bulwark and devise potential countermeasures that we can employ in a short amount of time. There was very little information that people could glean from this battle moon. It was a completely new thing that did not possess any direct relation to the enemies they fought in the past. Perhaps if they dug far enough into humanity's history, they may be able to find a number of adversary races that used to employ similar extravagant bioconstructs. However, humanity during the Age of Conquest fought with considerably less restrictions than in the present. While the Rebarthan Pact technically no longer had to abide by the prohibition against the use of weapons of mass destruction, in practice the Rebarthans were still reluctant to deploy them right away. Even as the Red War continued to grow bloodier by the day, neither side had truly committed to resorting to nuclear weapons, antimatter weapons, and other massively destructive attack methods. Both sides still demonstrated a remarkable amount of restraint despite all of the growing animosity and resentment. No matter how much they hated each other, the humans and aliens did not want to devastate the entire Red Ocean. So long as they could afford it, the combatants preferred to keep their planets and territories as intact as possible. The same could not be said with the mutated Vorabugs. They engaged in much more egregious actions and did not hesitate to strip entire planets of their valuable resources. Yet despite the unscrupulous nature of the insect foes, many red humans still hoped that their new enemies would figure out the universal conventions of warfare and agree to the unspoken rules. The Rebarthans were actually split on the matter. There was one side that insisted that the Vorabugs were not civilized enough to engage in any meaningful diplomacy. It was best to eradicate them without reserve. The greatest and most horrible weapons must be used to rid the stars of this voracious race. There was another side that expressed more optimism towards the new race. The mutated Vorabugs had grown rapidly, so it was not far-fetched for them to gradually grow smarter and more intelligent. Even if true patience was reserved for the bugs at the top, they should at least be able to agree to a handful of common principles. However, the latter opinion never gained much traction in society. The mutated Vorabugs were simply too inhuman for people to believe that they engaged in any form of reasoning. Most people considered the mutated Vorabugs to be bioweapons that had long gone out of control. The appearance of the Vorabug organic battle moon was not a coincidence. Did the insects possess the design of the VOBM from the start? Or did the Goliath princess personally invent it after learning about the cybernetic empire's war planets? Whatever the case, the Vorabug organic battle moon was bound to cause a lot of headaches among the Rebarthans, especially if these kinds of constructs started to show up elsewhere. Yes. The Rebarthan mech designer abruptly turned towards the Larkin son. Yes, Richard. We may need your strength and the strength of your ascended giants. A pause. I am afraid you are overestimating their capabilities. Their capacity for mass destruction is not as great as that of a decent-sized warship. More chapters in Buyer's Club for TMT. Chapter 7298. Phase Lord Advantage. VS looked at the projections showing the visual appearance, as well as the data related to the Vorabug organic battle moon. Though the name sounded a bit unwieldy, it accurately described the huge flesh ball that was strip-mining the outer planet of the Philaster Crestia system. The appearance of this odd and confounding battle moon triggered a new phase in the Vorabug war. The enemy had undoubtedly chosen to escalate. The Goliath hive was no longer content with trying to imitate alien phase lords. The mutated Vorabugs had begun to duplicate fortified planets. Just the thought of trying to destroy all of this biomass was giving VS a headache. He was not too certain about the other forces in the star system, but the Blue Jay fleet was ill-equipped to fight against this confounding biomoon. The fleet lacked capital ships and possessed a shortage of big guns. Sure, the subcapital warships could inflict a respectable amount of damage, but their sizes limited the scope of their firepower. At the very least, it would take them a long time to deplete the defenses of the huge battle moon. This was not good news because time was of the essence. The longer the biomoon managed to hold on and stay alive, the greater the likelihood that it could approach Philaster Crestia 3 and crash onto its surface. Once that happened, the damage to all of the existing planetary defenses, infrastructure and more would completely fall into the hands of the Vorabugs. If the crash did not kill or destroy the people and assets on the surface, then the spread of the flesh carpet and the burrowing of all of the resource-collecting insects would definitely ruin the planet in a short amount of time. Even if the Rebarthans launched a counterattack and retook the Philaster Crestia system, the globe would definitely be ridden with holes. VS raised his arm and rubbed his face. The moody atmosphere in the command center certainly did not help to inspire confidence. What do you expect from me and my ascended giants and I? Look, just because we are human phase lords doesn't mean we can take on an organic megaconstruct of this scale. Most of us can't even match the size of a juggernaut. It takes time, phase water and diligence for us to grow to the limit of a lesser phase lord. It has been less than a year since the phase lord department had begun to raise human phase lords. Their current growth rates are already remarkable, but the lack of time means that they still have many years to go before they can become large enough to hack moons apart with their bodies. Whatever the Rebarthans had in mind, VS did not have a lot of confidence that it would succeed. The Ascended Giants were simply too underdeveloped at this stage. Their lack of experience was almost crippling. Fighting as Ascended Giants was a whole other game. At least high-ranking mech pilots had enough years under their belt as standard mech pilots. They understood mech combat quite well and did not have to learn a completely different mode of combat once they broke through. The same could not be said for the Ascended Giants. Many of them consisted of elite infantry soldiers and so on. While they understood how to fight as infantrymen, human phase lords fought on a whole different level. Even if they could technically pose a threat against ace mechs and lesser phase lords, these were only theoretical possibilities. VS did not dare to bet that they could reach anywhere close to 100% of their combat potential in the next fight. One of the biggest problems we are facing is lack of intelligence. Lord Richard Brownstone said. We are able to make plenty of long-range scans and observations of the Vorbug organic battlemoon. However, that is far from enough for us to devise an effective means to destroy this giant organic siege construct. Our biotech scientists and other specialists have not yielded any significant data about what is hidden beneath the surface. We do not understand the internal structure at all. Is it solid? Is there a core in the middle? Is it hollow? All of these questions and more need to be answered before we can proceed. Proceed with what? VS asked. Proceed with understanding the nature and the structure of the VOBM, preferably before it can make landfall. VS frowned as he tried to parse those words. Are you talking about launching a scouting operation? Yes. Remote scouting attempts are not giving us the information we need. Roving patrols of Vorlbugs are also highly effective at intercepting our drones. Due to these setbacks, we have realized that the only effective means of understanding the VOBM is to conduct reconnaissance in force. We need to send a force that is small enough to evade detection as long as possible, but is also strong enough to get past the defenses and remain long enough to collect quality data before retreating. Why us? VS asked. Why can't you send a bunch of mechs or warships? The Brownstone Scion presented his arguments. We have thought about resorting to other means, but none of them are ideal to us. Mechs are too fragile and cannot get close enough to survive. The VOBM is constantly being patrolled by at least 1 million individual Vorbugs at this point. That makes it far too likely for a machine to encounter one of them. Sending a small warship or two will not help either. They may be tough enough to withstand greater damage, but their larger hull sizes and stronger energy signatures means that the Vorbugs will detect them much sooner. What about stealth mechs or stealth vessels? The mutated Vorbugs are aware of the existence of human stealth units. Richard replied. We have tried to sneak our stealth units into their strongholds in the past. They achieved limited success until they got caught. Ever since then, the Vorbugs wised up and always surrounded their most important locations and assets with large amounts of Vorbug patrols. Their erratic flight patterns and abundant numbers make it impossible to get close without colliding against one of the many patrols. In short, the Rebarthans could forget about resorting to stealth options. The mutated Vorbugs solved this problem in one of the most least efficient manner possible, which was to rely on their huge numbers to weave a giant physical net around critical locations and locations such as the VOBM. VS grunted in frustration. Although the solution employed by the Vorbugs was incredibly wasteful, it just happened to suit their characteristics perfectly. So long as it worked, there was nothing much for them to complain about. So what makes the Ascended Giants better than all of the other solutions? Let me explain, VS. A projection came to life. It showed a small number of scout vessels splitting up before trying to approach the Vorbug organic battle moon from different angles. We have devised a plan that begins with dispatching several scout vessels to the VOBM. The mutated Vorbugs are already familiar with such vessels. They recognize that these ships are too small and weak to pose a credible threat. That means that the native aliens will not be on guard against them and will only attempt to destroy them if they get too close. This is why they will stop their advance before they provoke the mutated Vorbugs. The scout vessels must do their utmost to lull the enemy into complacency. VS narrowed his eyes in thought. The reason why you want these scout vessels to appear as unthreatening as possible is because you want them to smuggle our Ascended Giants as close to the VOBM as possible? Am I correct? Lord Richard grinned. Exactly. I am not sure whether this idea has crossed your mind, but you and your Ascended Giants possess a distinctive advantage, one that your alien counterparts disdain to exploit. They can shrink to the size of humans when their prodigious strength is not needed, and reveal their giant physiques when it is finally time for them to take action. VS widened his eyes. If we send combat carriers or larger vessels to the VOBM, the mutated Vorbugs will prioritize their removal. They understand the threat posed by mechs and human phase lords. Just the size alone makes it clear that there is a threat. However, if a small ship carrying a bunch of humans approaches the battle moon, the Vorbugs will not assume that there is a threat so long as the intelligence hasn't leaked. Exactly. This plan takes full advantage of your ability to change your sizes. It was only when the small ships had come close enough that the Ascended Giants could reveal themselves. Wait. VS suddenly made an important realization. There is a big problem. While human phase lords are able to switch between human and giant forms, the same cannot be said for our equipment. Our raiments currently consist of solid alloy plating. Even if they can be disassembled, their combined volumes are far greater than what you can stuff inside the tiny cargo holds of those scouting vessels. Maybe the only equipment that they can use are smart metal undersuits. Lord Richard Brownstone nodded. We are well aware of that. This is why your Ascended Giants must perform their mission without their usual combat gear. If everything goes according to plan, then their spatial barriers should provide them with enough protection. There is no need for them to rely on additional gear. Their mission is not to destroy the Vorbug organic battle moon. Their only task is to carry specialized one-use scanning spikes and plunge them into the surface of the bioconstruct at equidistributed points. More projections came to life. One projection showed the initial approach of several scout vessels. All of a sudden, 30 Ascended Giants appeared outside their hulls. These giants only wore flimsy smart metal suits and carried no armaments at all. The only equipment they carried were scanning spikes that the Rebarthans had barely managed to fit into the cargo holds. When these giants emerged, the VOBM and the roving Vorabug patrols instantly became alarmed. Before the Vorabugs could ramp up their attacks and swarm the giants with an endless amount of bugs, the giants flew forward and spread out so that they surrounded the VOBM at perfectly even distances from each other. The giants then proceeded to throw the scanning spikes into the fleshy surface of the moon. Once the spikes landed in place, they released an incredibly powerful scanning pulse. This is quite a daring plan, VS muttered as he studied the details further. Will this actually work? They displayed the so-called scanning spikes, which appeared to be nothing more than spears scaled up for giants that were filled with high-tech, high-powered scanning devices. The projection even revealed the design details of the scanning spikes. VS could see that they were clearly designed in a hurry, but that made it simpler and easier for him to understand. The scanning spike possessed multiple functions. A part of them was meant to increase its endurance and allow it to last as long as possible. It even came with a single-use Azure Shield generator. Another part of its functions were dedicated to their primary mission, which was to conduct high-powered directional scans deep inside a large organic mass. In order to gather as much data as possible, their power levels had been cranked up to the point where their components would definitely burn out after a single use. Their final function was to transmit a huge amount of data back to the Rebarthans. There was no use in scanning the entire VOBM from 30 different points along its surface if the scanning spikes could not successfully send back their precious bounty. The Vorabugs initially knew nothing about ECM, but had become increasingly proficient as time went by. Even if their interference methods were still rudimentary for the time being, who knew how much better the VOBM was able to scramble any data transmissions? In order to ensure that the scanning spikes successfully delivered their data back to Rebarthan hands, their tops were designed to separate and blast away from the battle moon. The ascended giants needed to linger above the spikes they had just thrown in order to capture the ejected data storage modules. As long as they managed to capture them, they should withdraw immediately. More chapters in Buyer's Club for TMT. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.